Digital dive. The Republican National Convention is officially underway and had a lot of people talking online yesterday and into this morning. Now, delegates in Charlotte, North Carolina officially nominated Donald Trump for president and Mike Pence for vice president. Then a parade of speakers defended President Trump and took aim at Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley said America is not racist country and gave nod to Black Lives Matter, saying we value and respect every black life. Donald Trump Jr. said his father's administration is not going to tear down monuments and forget the people who built our great nation. Last night's lineup also included several of Trump's prominent black supporters, including NFL star Herschel Walker, who talked about his friendship with the Trump family and denied that President Trump is racist. Senator Tim Scott gave the final speech, talking passionately about race in America. One of the most quotable moments of the night came from Scott, who said, "Our family went from cotton to Congress in one lifetime." The president himself was also featured several times throughout the program, seen meeting with frontline workers and former hostages. Now, on night two tonight, the First Lady, Melania Trump, Mike Pompeo, and Nicholas Salmon, the Covington Catholic High School student who made headlines last year in a confrontation with protesters in D.C., are all expected to speak. So another big lineup tonight, Chris.
Yeah, sure is, and that will continue for the next couple of days. Thanks, Alicia.